Watch today's video to find out how to use Faux Trapunto on a panel. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and today I'm going to show you how to take a panel like this one. This is actually only part of a panel, and you can learn how to do Faux Trapunto on it. Now, before we get into this technique, I want to talk a little bit about what panels are better for this technique and what panels are not so great for this technique. Okay, I say better because, again, it's a little bit of personal preference here, but there are some panels that this technique just won't work as well for. So one of the ones I don't think it'll work very well for is this particular one here. It's a Christmas panel with Maxine, Hallmark, one of Hallmark's characters. And in this panel, there's all these little mini panels, if you will, inside it. I don't know that I would cut this one up, actually. I might just leave it the whole way it is. However, you can see all these little small parts. So I just think it's too small for this Faux Trapunto technique to work very well, because you'd be doing an awful lot of stitching around here. And then the other thing is, when you use this technique, you want whatever you're stitching around to stand out, and you want to be able to do a lot of quilting, a lot of dense quilting on the remaining part to push it back. And there isn't a lot of, place to quilt around these kind of main areas. So a panel like this with a lot of detail, a lot of small parts in it, I don't think would work very well for Faux Trapunto. However, for one that will work better, I have this panel here. Now, this is actually a panel from Gingerbread, and it's called Merriment, and it's got 4 different animals on it. So I've already cut them down smaller so you can see them. But easily you can see how there's a very simple shape in the middle. All the animals are very simple, and you don't have a lot of intricate detail. So what you're going to be doing with the Faux Trapunto is you're going to be stitching around the main area on the panel. So you want something very simple. So the bear or the owl, and you could decide whether you want to just go around the owl or go around the branch it's sitting on as well. There's a deer, again, very simple. And then there's the fox, which is, I've already started some work on the fox because I thought he was really cute. So you need to pick out the right kind of panel first. That's your first thing to do with the Faux Trapunto. Now, if you do have a panel that has a lot of detail in it, but they're bigger pieces, then you might have to think about, what do I want to stand out, and only highlight those areas. And by highlighting, I mean putting some extra batting behind them. So let's talk about that next. So you need 2 kinds of batting to do Faux Trapunto. One is going to be behind the focal point that you want to be highlighted, and the other one is the batting you will use behind the whole quilt top, just like you usually do when you're making a quilt sandwich. So a good choice for the focal point is either wool or cotton wool batting. Okay, it's got a little more loft than just 100% cotton, so that's good to put just behind that focal point, in this case the fox. Then I'm using behind it as a sort of a stabilizer, if you will, an 80-20 cotton polyester. So that's really good to put behind it. And then, of course, you need to have your backing fabric as well. In this case, I'm just going to use this light tone-on-tone fabric. So I think that'll work really well with my panel. So let's talk about other things you need when you're making this project. And everything wants to stick to the batting right now. Okay, so what else do you need? Okay, you've got your panel, or in this case, part of a panel, but it's pretty big, I think, for a panel that I want to use. So I've got that. I've got my batting, and I'll talk about how I've stitched that on in just a second. I also need a few other things. So I need some thread. So what you're going to do initially is you're going to stitch around the outline of that focal point with, what I like to use is some invisible thread. Now, this is monopoly from Superior Threads. It comes in either a smoke color, or you can get it in this clear. And the clear is what I used to do the fox. Okay, the smoke is for if you're working with darker fabric. So obviously I'm not using that in this particular project. And then you also need to have some bobbin thread, not invisible thread, but a lightweight polyester. So I think I was using a 60 weight polyester thread in the bobbin, worked just fine. You could go even to an 80 weight if you wanted to. So the first thing you need to do is layer your panel on top of that wool or wool cotton blend batting, and then you want to stitch around it with that invisible thread. And so I just ran around the outline on the outside of the fox. Now, In this particular case, you can see all these little hash marks here. That's what I stitched on, okay? And where there wasn't hash marks, well, I just went around the outside a little bit, right? So that worked really well. So I'm free motion quilting all this, by the way. That's what I'm doing. You could, I suppose, use your walking foot if you wanted to, but it was really quick using the free motion quilting method. After I finished that, then the next step is to cut away some of that batting. I know it seems weird, right? You just put it on. What are you doing? You're not cutting it all away. You're only cutting part of it away. So you're going to need some sharp scissors. I like these duckbill applique scissors. If you have some embroidery scissors, you could use those as well. One of the caveats is to be very careful, of course. So when you flip this over, you can see the outline of the fox that I have stitched down. And what do you want to cut off? Well, you want to cut off the excess batting. So that's all the batting outside the stitched lines, right? So you can go in with your scissors, and you do have to be a little careful. And by the way, when I put this on, when I put the batting on, I didn't even use anything to put it on with. It's such a small piece. I just put it on, smoothed it down, and it was fine. You could pin it on, you could spray baste it on, however you want to do that if you feel the need, but it actually just stuck on there with no problem. So you're going to cut in here with this. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. And I hesitate to do this on camera in case I cut too far. But then we could talk about what you do if that happens. So you're trying to get in as close as you can. So I'm pulling the batting away, and I'm using my scissors underneath. And so I'm trying to be really careful. Two things. I don't cut the stitching I've already done. And maybe even more importantly, I don't cut the panel top, right? And you don't have to be super, super close. I mean, you know, you're trying to do your best to go around here. And if you've ever done a machine embroidery and you're doing applique pieces where you just put a piece of fabric down and then the embroidery machine does around, you know, stitches around it and you have to cut off the excess, you'll probably have this technique down already. So you just keep going along and cutting off all this excess batting. So if I'm getting into some areas, this is fairly simple because it's just, you know, around the outside here. But if I'm getting into some areas like you can see in here, I'm probably going to resort to my smaller embroidery scissors to get in there at least. So you can use a combination of scissors. So this is probably the most time-consuming part of the project because you don't want to rush it, because if you do and you make a mistake and you cut something, you know, that could be a real big problem. So I'm just going to continue on and cut out the rest of this so you can see what it looks like, and then we can move on to the next step. Now I've cut off all the batting, and this is what I have cut off, okay? So depending on how big those are, you may want to keep them or not. I'm going to put those over the side right now. So here's what my little fox looks like now on the front. Pretty much the same. Okay, on the back though, looks a little bit different. So you see how I've gone in and cut out all that excess batting. That's been, you know, outside those stitched lines. Good. Step one done. Now we want to take the other batting, the 80-20 cotton and poly, and my backing fabric that I have here, and I want to make my quilt sandwich. So this again is not a very big project, as I mentioned, so whether or not you actually need to baste this down is up to you. So a lot of times what I'll do instead is just put some pins around it for now, because we're actually going to be working again on the focal point, which is the fox here, because the next step is to go back and do some more stitching, okay? So at this point in time, what I want to do is I want to stitch around the fox again. So I've done it once with the invisible thread. So you can see it's down, but you can't really see the thread very well. I want to continue stitching on those lines so you won't see that invisible thread, and I'm going to do that with another thread, all right? So I've got some micro quilter here from Superior Threads. This is 100 weight polyester, and I think that's what I'm going to use to stitch around the fox again. Doesn't have to be exactly on the invisible thread, but you want to try and get it as close as you can, because in the long run, you're really not going to see that stitching all that much, trust me, okay? So you could use whatever type of thread you wanted to outline this. Probably a lighter weight, like a 60 weight polyester or cotton even, maybe, if you wanted to. But what you're going to do is just repeat the process you did before, only with that additional batting and the backing on the, or I should say underneath the panel that you've already had stitched that additional piece of batting on. So I'm going to go to the machine and we're going to start doing that so you can see what I mean, what I'm talking about as far as stitching over this again. So now I'm back in the machine to do the second round of stitching over the stitching I had already previously done. Okay, so I'm using the micro quilter, which is 100 weight polyester in the top and about a 60 weight, I think, in the bobbin thread. I could have wound up the micro quilter in the bobbin as well, but I got lazy, so you can do that and it'll work just fine. So I'm going to start my stitching in a kind of inconspicuous place. I always like to do that, start and stop in somewhere where the eye wouldn't naturally go. Well, I think you get the idea of what I'm doing. So I'm just going to continue on and stitch all around the fox. And then when I'm finished that part of the stitching, I'll show you what it looks like. So I finished stitching around the fox, and this is what it looks like. So we now have 2 layers of batting under the fox and just 1 layer, everything outside the fox, right? So this is what it looks like now. So it's getting puffy, okay? And one of the things I did when I went with the second round of stitching is that I actually went in and did some stitching in here. All right, and around here to give a little more dimension, a little difference between the face and the chest on the deer. It's not a deer, on a fox. On the fox. I keep thinking it's a deer. Okay, if I just look at it like this, it looks like a deer. Okay. Anyway, this is what it looks like at this stage. Okay. So the next thing to do is to do quilting all around the fox. All right. So what I want to do is I want to do some dense quilting to push that background down as much as I can. So I'm going to do that. It doesn't have to be anything intricate. I just want to push it down. And by the way, I just cut these panels up. I may trim this down a little bit smaller. I obviously have to at the bottom here because on one of the other pieces, there's actually the selvage on it. So I want them all to be about the same size. So I'm probably going to trim this down, not a lot, but a little bit. So I'm not going to have to do quilting completely out to the edges. But that's the next thing to do. So I'm going to use that same, I think I'll use that micro quilter thread because it's nice and thin at 100 weight. And I really don't want to see the quilting. I just want to have that texture, that nice texture in the background. And I want it to get pushed back so the little fox will stand out. So that's what I'm going to do next. So I finished all the quilting in the background. Whew, that's a lot of quilting, but boy, is it worth it. So here is what my little fox looks like now. You can see all these E's and 3's are what these are, cursive E's and 3's. If you don't know what that is, check above or in the description below because I have a video on how to do those. It's one of my favorite designs to go to. So it pushes that background back, allowing the little fox to stand out. So the only thing I have to do now is to trim it. You'll notice I haven't quilted quite to the edges because I'm going to trim it down. And then I need to add some binding to it, and then it'll be all done. And I think it's going to look absolutely stunning when I have it up on the wall for Christmas. Thanks for joining me today. Please remember to subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified the next time I release a new video. And before you go, check out these other videos I've included just for you. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com. And today I'm working on this project